Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers!
Happy birthday to you.
Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. To kick off today's episode, I want you to do a quick exercise with me. So I want you to close your eyes for a moment. Unless you're driving while you're listening to this, please keep your eyes open. But I want you to think of a space where you feel completely comfortable, or as close to completely comfortable as we can get here. A space that isn't your home. Yep. Not your own space. It could be somewhere that you currently frequent. It could be somewhere that you frequented in your past. It could be somewhere that you went once or twice, but it left a deep impression on you. Anywhere that you feel at ease. What comes to mind for you? Now, for me, this brings me images of my grandparents' house. And when I think of my grandparents' house, I am flooded with images. One of the first being my grandma standing on the front porch as I drive in. I can picture it so perfectly. Their driveway was kind of curved and she's standing up there, up some steps. The house is brown. Another one that comes to mind is playing cards with my grandparents after dinner. So all the dishes would be put away. We'd be sitting in the living room at a round 4-person table. I am sitting with my back to the windows facing the kitchen. My grandpa's across from me. My grandma's on my right. We always sat in the same chairs. Gosh, we played so many cards there. We would play, crazy aces when I was little, rummy, some cribbage, a lot of hearts. So much hearts until I was old enough to play pinochle. And then we played that. And I can picture the cards on the table. I can picture the placemats. I can even picture the after dinner tea, complete with a little teacup and a saucer. And I can picture the floral china pattern on it. Another memory that comes flooding back is if you went out the back door, there was like a patio. Their garage was across the way. Like there was a door outside into the garage. But if you walked kind of along this patio between the garage and the house, you got into their side yard and there were 2 raised beds over there. There was a pear tree, and then under the patio actually were my grandpa's tomatoes. And I can picture going out there and walking through the raised beds and down into the tomatoes. My grandpa showing me what was growing, whether it was the beans or the tomatoes or the lettuce. Him kneeling down with his knees on a little yellow pad that was falling apart and peeling. And all the hours I would just sit out there picking green beans and eating them while talking to him. And those are the types of things that come flooding back for me. If you think about your space, maybe hit pause right now and think about the place you chose and a couple of the memories that flood back for you, or anything. Maybe it's just something particular about that place that isn't even a memory. Maybe it's kind of like a snapshot of a certain part of that space or whatever comes flooding back. Think about what that is. Now, the thing is, I can actually walk through my grandparents' entire house in my mind. This is actually something I do quite often when I'm trying to go to bed. Oddly enough, if you need a way to fall asleep, I will pick a part of their house as if I walked in the front door, and I will envision everything about it. You walk in the front door, there was a rug, the stairs were on the left. I can picture where the outlets were. I can picture that like entryway table off and to the right. And the photo above it's kind of foggy. I'm going to have to think about that because most things are pretty clear in this house. And in front of me is another table. They had a big orange sectional. Like I can walk through this house. I can picture where certain books were, where certain art was, where the closets were, what was in the closets, right? I can picture all the stuff and the items and the design and the decor. But that's not what comes back first. What naturally surfaces when I think of being there are those memories with my grandparents. And if you're like, Alex, why the heck did we just do this exercise? And I want you to stick with me here. Because what I've been thinking about recently is that we've been trained by social media to believe that these little details, the perfectly styled coffee table, the organized pantry, the matching throw pillows, are what people remember about our homes. We can pick up that device we probably walk around with in our pocket all the time, and we can scroll through countless images of perfect spaces. And I think somewhere along the way, we started believing that that is what lingers in our guests' minds. But didn't we just prove that wrong? Like if you think back to the space you just pictured, was it the decor that came to mind first? Or was it the feeling of just being there? Of the memories made, of the people who made that space feel like a second home to you. So why is it that we're letting these surface level details hold us back from hosting, from creating space and letting people into our homes? For creating the same meaningful memories we were just envisioning for other people, but also for ourselves. If you think about it, we are living in this really bizarre time where we can walk through strangers' homes in our minds, houses we've never stepped foot in. I can think of influencers where I can do a very similar exercise to the one of walking through my grandparents' home for people I have never met. And I think that it's doing something strange to our perception of what really matters when we're in other people's spaces. Now, if we're talking about these scrolled spaces, as we'll call them, what comes to mind? What are you seeing, right? I see a few different things. I think of the perfectly curated house that has like white walls and marble countertops, the perfect little like light wood accents, framed TVs. My gosh, I could go on and on and on. And because we're being sold products, right? That's quite often, not always, they might have something else. There's a lot of affiliate links, right? We're being sold a product. That is what they're highlighting. And think of how that is warping our brain and how we are coming to expect that. Like when we pick up our phone, we are coming to expect a nice space. Now, I do think that we are actually in like a transition. I am seeing this where more people are showing more, I guess, like lived in spaces. That's more of what people want, these like photo dumps, things like that. But this transition is new. We are very used to that millennial curated space. And if it's not a perfect white space, then maybe you are in the part of the design algorithm, the world that I am, where you're getting more of like an eclectic mix with the perfect mid-century thrift finds and one-of-a-kind furniture pieces that somebody had created for their space. And you're wondering like, can I get that somewhere because I like it? But nope, turns out they had it created just for their content, their feed, their space, their home. But they are still, whether it is white walls and marble countertops and light wood or more of a colorful, eclectic, mid-century vibe, it is this curated space that is like designed to go on a magazine, in an ad, on a how-to video. And yet we're thinking that that's the standard, that's the average. And I think that, again, we are seeing a little bit of a shift into the lived-in spaces. But for a long time there, that was not the case. It was like if you had that lived-in space, Then you filmed in one corner where nobody could tell that your house looked like a movie set. Or you filmed out when you were walking, or you filmed, think of all the people who film in their car. I mean, maybe it's because it's a quiet space. Maybe it's because there's no one bothering them, but also maybe it's because a car is just a car and they don't feel like their home meets that aesthetic standard of showing up on camera. And so because of that, we are inundated with these perfectly curated spaces every time we are online, on TV, on news media, like they're everywhere. If you aren't a social media person, you're still seeing these. They're in ads. They're the photos you're seeing in news articles. And so because of that, there is a mass quantity of spaces that look like that out there. But I would wonder, is that actually the majority? Like, do you get what I'm saying? It feels like the majority because that's what people are showing. Because if you don't live in a space like that, you're probably trying not to show it until maybe recently. So we feel like it's the majority, but is it? Is it? Because I don't think it is. I think most people have lived in imperfect, messy, not pretty designed homes. Another example of this, if you're like not into design, would be maybe those ASMR type videos. Like what comes to mind is the ice stocking trend that was out there for a while. I got stuck in that. I would see some of those videos. They're very soothing. Do you know what I'm talking about? People would make all these different types of ice, coffee ice, glitter ice, ice flavored with juice, ice with berries in it, ice with lemon and lime slices in it, ice with whole flowers in it. And they'd be frozen in different shapes, right? They'd buy all these different ice molds, some that look like flowers, some that were little pebbles, some that were perfect squares, some that were tall for a water bottle. Gosh, can you tell I've watched a few of these? And then they would take all these different types of ice. There'd be all these sounds, which is why it's the ASMR. It's very soothing. And they would put them in perfect, like clear containers that somehow fit perfectly into their freezer drawer. And then you go to your own freezer. I don't know about you. I go to my freezer right now. It's actually so full because we just went to Costco that this morning I put a bag of mangoes just like straight in the ice tray. We will not have ice because currently it needs to hold mangoes for at least a few more days because we will only be eating out of the freezer for the next few days because we just went to Costco and we have more than enough food. So although I might see the perfectly curated, stacked ice of all kinds in these videos and think like that's what people expect is a perfectly organized, curated freezer, if you come over to my house right now to hang out, and you need ice, you're getting frozen mangoes in your water. Sorry. That's what it is right now. And that's slightly ridiculous. I get that of an example, but do you see how silly that is? It's like thinking that if your pantry is not full of perfect plastic containers, something's wrong with you. Our brains have been warped. So we need to rewire them because we're telling ourselves that when people come to our space, they absorb details the same way we do when we're watching content on the internet. But they're not. Like we already proved that in our exercise. They're not. When people come to our space, there's this opportunity for a deep emotional imprint, for somebody to have felt comfortable or safe or welcomed or loved or entertained. And that is what we need to remember, is that there is a difference between visiting a real home than there is scrolling through a curated one. And that difference needs to be accounted for in our expectations of our own spaces and what really matters. Because what sticks with people in our memories is the feeling of being in that room with those people over the furniture placement. It is the connection they had over perfection. And quite frankly, I actually think there's a lot of comfort in the imperfection, right? If you come over to my house and I'm like, oh, sorry, don't have any ice cubes, you get mangoes in your water. You're probably thinking to yourself, like, yeah, I got some things like that would happen if you came to my house too. And there is comfort in that. Now, because I can't leave this alone, because we know I like to beat things to the ground, I want to just go a little deeper. I really, really want you to walk away seeing how silly this is. Because here's the thing about those perfect spaces that we're scrolling through. They're essentially TV sets. Am I wrong? People live in them, sure. But a lot of these people, if you are creating content on a large scale, they are creating spaces where they can walk around and film anywhere and feel good about their background, right? They want to get the perfect photo. We don't know what's behind those doors and those closets. That's why there's lots of closets. Another way to think about this would be when you are creating an event. And this is something I know a lot about. I was a wedding and event planner for over 10 years, and I can't tell you the number of times that I have seen people sacrifice real connection for the perfect photo. So I'm going to give you an example. I have had clients very far in the past who were very, very focused on the photos for their albums, right? Which would go on their coffee table book, for their social media, for their memories. What they think are the memories they will keep. And maybe they are. I sure hope not. I hope that's not what they remembered. And what they want is, before anybody goes into the reception space, they want these photos of the room set perfectly, right? They've spent months, years envisioning the chairs and the linens and the table settings and the stationery that goes perfectly with the floral arrangement and the lighting, the scene overall. And they want these perfect photos. And they're such a priority that I have had clients before who won't let any guests into that reception room. And so when they look back, they're going to see the perfect photo. But what is actually happening is, because the guests can't be in that room, they're outside of the cocktail hour. Have you been at this wedding before? You maybe have. They are outside of the cocktail hour, and it's hot, like very hot. Everybody's sweaty. People are out there dabbing their napkins. There's barely any ice left because it's all inside the air-conditioned reception space. They're hot, and they are not having a fun time. And all they want to do is go in there. And they are sacrificing, right, connection, comfort for that perfect photo. And that is just another example of when perfect can get in the way of connection. Now, if we're going to bring this back, I'm going to give you another example of how out of control this has gotten. Did anyone else watch the Martha Stewart doc? If you didn't, you should, for a variety of reasons. But this is probably where this whole idea of how influencer culture has affected us came from for me. I mean, I think it's kind of been lingering there, but this really cemented this as a podcast topic, because when I watched that doc, I found it fascinating how Martha moved to this house, I think in Connecticut. I believe it's in Connecticut. And she was like, this is perfect because it gives me all these projects, right? I can like create this perfect entertaining home in this garden, and it creates all this opportunity for content. And I think logically we know this, but we don't really think about it. But back in the day when she did that, that was pretty new, right? Martha was like one of the original influencers, if not the original influencer. And so she would redo her garden. And as she did that, she would create how-tos, and she would shoot video, and well, maybe not video back in the day, but photos, and it would all go in her magazine and in her books. And she would remodel her kitchen and set it up perfectly to be the backdrop for her book cover, to be in all of her photo shoots, to go in the magazine. There would be how-tos. The purpose of it wasn't necessarily for her to live in it. I'm not saying she disliked living in it, but the point was to create the content, to create something aspirational. And because she was like an original influencer, and I think maybe also because the media sources were slower, right? They were books, they were magazines. It wasn't 10 potential videos a day. You got like one magazine a month, couple books a year, we could separate the fact that when we maybe looked at the magazine and then we'd be like, wow, that's beautiful. And that would be so cool if my home looked like that. That's amazing. And then we would stop reading the magazine. We would put it down and we would go to our neighbor's house. We didn't expect our neighbor's house to look like the spread in Martha Stewart's magazine. And I think that has something to do with the fact that we weren't inundated with it all the time. And we could separate it out as like, it's aspirational. It is not the normal for everyone. The normal for everyone was getting up and going to someone's home. So now if we fast forward and we look at what's happening today, right? The creation and consumption of this type of aspirational content is quicker. There are endless videos you can find, not even just from one person, but from all these people. And you start to think that it's normal. And I'm not saying anything bad on the influencers who are doing this. Like, influencing is a female-driven business. It drives massive revenue. This is not a negative critique on being an influencer. It's the warped situation we're in that we think that these people whose houses and content we have constant access to are just average, everyday people, and that our homes should look just like theirs. And if they don't, then we shouldn't let people in, right? It's the mix of the fact that we can walk into somebody's home who we've never even met, and I can picture what it looks like. So then if I walk in to somebody else's home, but like this time not on a screen, this time with my feet in person through their front door, that it should look like that. Because I have endless examples all day of what a nice home looks like. It's forgetting that influencers' home are often their actual like content studios, that the items they bring in and make videos of are part of their business, that they could go and, let's say, buy a car, create content on how to organize it, how to clean it, how to fit 4 car seats in it. And suddenly that's part of their business. That's not just like an average everyday situation. That's something they took all their time, energy, business funds to create and film. But because of all of this, we just think that's normal. And then we end up in this comparison trap where we think we need to meet these standards potentially, where we might feel embarrassed or ashamed or anxious if we let someone into our home after we've virtually been in a bunch of strangers' homes, only for them to realize that our home doesn't look like those aspirational homes, right? When we are perhaps so overwhelmed by the fact that people might perceive various defects or flaws in the space we find comfortable. And we're consumed by it, right? We can't stop thinking about it. We can't stop cleaning and like, oh, I'll have people over when I get a new couch, when I organize that area, when I do this, when it looks a certain way. And so because of that, we are avoiding social situations. We're avoiding hosting and allowing everybody in because we think, because of the repetition of it, because of the access to it, we think that those little details, that the way our coffee table is styled or the photos we hang on the wall or the couch that we choose, the vibe we create, that is what people will remember. When in fact, as we proved the very, very beginning of this episode, that's really not the case. Like what I have learned after years of watching people gather, even whether it's in my own life, in my career as an event planner, and in what I witnessed as a kid, my mom and my grandma loved to host, is that what people are actually craving isn't a perfect party. It's not something that they'll leave and they'll have to come down from. They have to go back to reality. What they are craving is real connection. Like we've all been to those parties. You know what I'm talking about, where you go to this gathering, whether it's like a big corporate work holiday party or it's at that friend's house who always has like the perfect curated thing. And you're in that environment, and that's great. Don't get me wrong. It's fun to be there, but maybe you have a little bit of like, oh, okay, well, that was a great step into an alternate universe. Like now I have to go back to reality. And I'm not saying those are bad. Those are fun, but they're not what a lot of people are craving. Maybe every once in a while, but for the most part, what people are craving are real spaces to be with other people, to create those memories, to feel safe and comfortable and seen and loved, where they can just be themselves. So I want to close out this episode by kind of giving you a permission slip on how we move forward, how we reframe this so you can let the rest of it go. This is your permission to let go of any inkling you have that you need the perfectly curated space to have people over to your home. The thing I hope will maybe rewire your brain a little bit is this idea of holding space versus curating space. So what I mean by holding space is just this idea that you can invite people to your home, and by being welcoming, by being present, by listening and being listened to and sharing and being in the moment with each other, you are holding space. You don't need all the fancy bells and whistles. In fact, your house can be pretty messy. You cannot serve them any food. You can not decorate a single thing, and you can hold space. And I think that matters more than the aesthetics, because that's what lasts, as we proved in the very beginning of this episode. And not only that, but holding space, I think, is what creates genuine connection, right? That is what's you being yourself. That's the whole point of it. And your guests being themselves, and everyone just feeling like grounded almost. If I think about it, you feel grounded. And it's fun to go to a curated space, to go to a big party. That can be, or it might be awful. You might be like, oh, that is not fun. Let's say it's fun. Let's pretend that it's fun. You got a little dressed up and it was fancy and it was a vibe, and like you danced and you did all these things, and then you left, maybe like me, with your heels in your hand because you were like, my feet hurt 2 hours ago. And that felt like a little bit of a grounding reality. But you're leaving. You're like, oh, okay, well, this was so fun, but I got to go take my makeup off. I got to take this dress off. I'm going to go put my sweatpants back on, like back to reality. And I think that's the difference. It's like, what are you creating? Both are fun. But sometimes I think in this day and age that holding space is harder because it's not the norm, because it's a little outside the box, and because the work that we have to do isn't decorating and cooking and fussing. The work we have to do is sitting with ourselves and our own discomfort and anxiety that we might have about whatever we perceive as flaws in our space. Whoa, this episode got deep. If you're still struggling with this and you have just been trained that if you're going to have people over, you must do all the things, right? You must cook and decorate and clean and do all these things. I would actually suggest you go way back in the archives and listen to episode 6, which is about the 6 roles of hosting. I can't remember. I mean, that was episode 6, guys. We're on episode 111. I can't remember if that was actually 5 roles or 6 roles, but it is now 6 roles. The roles are initiating, being the one to organize the gathering, dealing with food and beverage, decorating, cleaning, and what I call day of hosting, which is actually kind of that idea of being present with your people. And if you want to dive deeper into that, you can go to alexalex.link/hosting, where I have some other free resources talking about those 6 roles and how you don't need to do them all. Because I think that really holding space is really that day of hosting and probably the organizing. Honestly, you might not even be the initiator and you might hold space. Somebody else might say, hey, that old work group of us, we should get together. That's the initiating. And you might be like, I can do that. People can come to my place. And you might give them a day and a time. You write the organizing. They're going to text you if they can't find parking nearby or something. And then you're going to be present. And that might be it. You might not do the other things, or you might outsource them. That's what I mean about holding space. And I think that these authentic spaces matter more than ever for a few reasons. And I'm just going to kind of list them off because I have podcast episodes where you can go deeper. I think that one of the reasons that these authentic spaces matter is because of the decline of third places. If you don't know what a third place is a communal space where you can go and kind of just exist. It's like living rooms in our communities, places where you don't have to pay to be there, where you can just choose to go there without a reservation. And over time, if you go there continually, you'll start to see familiar faces, right? Because other people are doing the same thing. And in episode 38 and 39, I talk about the decline of third places, and I also talk about how we can revive them, specifically in episode 39 with Nathan Albach. The next reason that I think authentic spaces matter more than ever is, this is a blanket reason, but is the loneliness epidemic. And I have I talk about loneliness in a lot of episodes, but if you go to episode 27, What is Loneliness, and episode 69, Unpacking Learned Loneliness, I go more into each of those. But at the end of the day, part of this loneliness epidemic, like at the root of it, isn't just being around people. It's being around people and feeling seen and heard and safe and comfortable. So if your home can be that space for someone, that's a pretty big deal. Another reason that I think these authentic spaces, creating them in your home, matters is because we just quite frankly have a need for kind of like genuine gatherings, for spaces where, like I was saying earlier, we can feel grounded. And part of that has to do with the host, and part of it also has to do with the guest. And if you're wondering from the guest side, you can go listen to episode 91 where I talk about how to stop dreading parties. There's lots of places to keep going if this is a topic that interests you. And if there's somewhere in this episode that you want to go even further, send me a DM, send me a voice memo, let's talk about it. Because I do think that when we really dig into this and we look at it, is it just me? Aren't you also sitting here being like, wow, this has really warped my brain, and I need to rewire this situation because now I can see how it's impacting me. So this is your permission that if you want to gather people more, or you want to be invited to more gatherings, then I want to remind you that your house, or the house you're going to, doesn't need to be Instagram ready. Connection matters more than perfection. I want to remind you that people want to be in your space because you are interesting. And by being in your space, quite frankly, if you come to my house, for example, you might have seen it on social media, but if you come here and you're in this space, you're going to find out things like you're eating mangoes instead of ice. And then you're going to be asking me what all the things are in my freezer and why there's so much. And being in someone's space gives so much more insight into who they are. And people want to know you. People want to know you. They don't want to walk into a showroom. People want to know who you are. So the next time you're hesitating to invite people over because your house doesn't look like an influencer's, remember this. No one walks through their memories thinking about the perfectly styled coffee table. They remember how it felt to sit on that couch. They remember laughing with the people sitting around them. They remember the simple conversation where they feel seen. People are just desperate for somewhere to feel like they belong, and you might have just the space. And with that, I'll see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.